First, though, oh dear, there's more of Matt Hancock's leaked WhatsApp messages in the Telegraph this morning. Claims that he wanted to keep schools closed during parts of the pandemic. Here to make sense of all of this, Daily Mirror editor Alison and LBC's radio Sangita Myska. It's so good to see both of you. Now, where do I begin? I don't quite know where. Why, first of all, why would you give all the WhatsApps to somebody like this particular journalist who's got previous?
I can only imagine if you are an utter fool. I mean, utter fool to give 100,000 WhatsApp messages to a journalist, and not just a journalist who has had a real anti-lockdown agenda for quite some time. So he, however, would argue the reason he gave the WhatsApp messages to Isabel Oakeshott, the journalist behind the story in the Telegraph, is that because she helped him write his book, which came out just before Christmas, where he told his story, I mean, his side of everything that happened during the pandemic. So that's why, I mean, whether it was just monumentally foolish, it would appear it may well have been.
But this story raises a whole host of questions about the functioning of government and whether or not it was sensible during the biggest crisis we've faced since World War II. What it also does is raise very serious questions about that man's judgment.
Yes.
Matt Hancock's judgment, not just on a professional basis, which was already under scrutiny and will be under scrutiny quite rightly in the public inquiry, but on a personal level.
Yeah.
On a personal level, to hand over detailed WhatsApp messages. He was not only giving away the trust that he had developed with Isabel Oakeshott, but also what he did was share messages from other people
like Chris
with a
Whitty,
third
and
party.
That's not fair. It's just
I
not
almost
fair.
wonder if it's not actually... Well, I think there is foolishness, but I actually think it's arrogance. Yeah. It's that sense that, oh, this won't happen to me. I can do what I like and I'll be fine.
So never even thinking about the consequences of doing that?
Absolutely.
It also was quite shocking to see just how chaotic it all was, don't you think? It was chaos was happening there.
I have a little bit more sympathy on that front insofar as it genuinely was an unprecedented situation. Sorry to use that phrase again. But it was unprecedented. They were trying to work out what was happening. To some degree, there are some exchanges in which he comes out reasonably well. But the bottom line is giving over thousands of messages. We are journalists. If somebody gave me thousands of their personal messages, actually, just on a level of my own integrity, I might say to them, are you sure you want to do this?
But I also take the point that, you know, it was a very difficult time and any of us would have struggled in that situation. But the idea that during that incredibly difficult time, we had government policy being made across WhatsApp is deeply worrying. So the whole point of the way government operates is that you have meetings, there are minutes taken, there can be public scrutiny of that at a later date. That's the point of the public inquiry, which is just kicking off. But the public inquiry will probably never, ever have seen these messages. And that's why this kind of chummy sort of, you know, and things like getting a test, a COVID test, couriered around to Jacob Rees-Mogg's house for one of his children to have a test. Just, oh, I'll sort that out for you. It's this chumminess that just talks this idea that there's one set of rules for them and one set of rules for the rest of us.
Because there were one set of rules for them and another set of rules for us. And the person that showed that most was, I'm afraid, Matt Hancock. And quite honestly, I would be very interested, Lorraine, to find out what Matt Hancock's ex-wife might think of the fact that Isabel Oakeshott, a woman, has abused the trust of Matt Hancock. I wonder whether he now knows how that might feel.
Interesting. He has made a statement this morning. He has said that. He says, I'm hugely disappointed and sad at the massive betrayal and breach of trust by Isabel Oakeshott. I'm also sorry for the impact on the very many people, political colleagues, civil servants and friends who worked hard with me to get through this pandemic and save lives. This isn't going away anytime soon. There's going to be an awful lot of this. It raises all sorts of questions as to whether she should have given that to the Daily Telegraph.
I'm sure he probably is disappointed and sad, but he's not as disappointed and sad as the thousands of people who lost family members in care homes during that period.
Absolutely.
And that's why we need to scrutinise the decisions that were made at that time. So he's disputing some of the stuff that came out in those messages yesterday, but it certainly appears that far from throwing a protective shield around the care homes, which is what they said they did at the time, that did not happen. Now, there may be reasons why that happened, and that's what the public needs to know. But nevertheless, it is appalling the way those families were treated.
There is some weight, though, isn't there, in the argument that what we have now got is trial by media. What we really needed was a proper investigation, scrutiny via the public inquiry.
And they take too long, these inquiries. You know, the rest of the world, the rest of Europe, it's happening far quicker than us.
Sweden have done this.
And actually, the question here is, why is it that we've already spent millions and millions of pounds on this public inquiry and yet they've not heard a single piece of evidence? And I think the next pressing question is is it right, actually, for Matt Hancock at this point to come out and address some of the very acute questions that are now being asked? For example, you said that you were going to throw a protective ring around care homes. Yeah. That clearly didn't happen. You went against Chris Whitty's advice and you didn't test people coming out of hospitals into care homes. Why not? And I tell you what, the reason I feel this very strongly is because I remember when that happened, I was standing outside a care home, first sets of patients being discharged, and doctors, I was ringing doctors and doing my research, and they were saying, these elderly people cannot be protected if people are coming out of a hospital now with an infection. A care home is not a place that is set up for infection control. Why? Because they are warm, they have got carpets, there are carers going from one person to another. They are sharing spaces. We knew this at that time, and actually I think pressure is going to grow on Matt Hancock to explain what happened now.
Do you think the pressure grows in the sense that his profile is very much enhanced by this whole campaign that he had to rehabilitate himself, which, you know, we're going to see him in SAS celebrities, you know, Who Dares Wins. We saw him, of course, infamously in The Jungle. Does that, I mean, has that backfired spectacularly on him, do you think?
Yes, completely.
Because he came out of that thinking, yay, this is it.
No doubt it's backfired.
Because there was a TikTok campaign of a load of, like, 13 and 14-year-olds who voted for him for that to win The Jungle. That's why. I mean, anybody who sort of thought credibly about why on earth he should have been in there, it was absolutely repellent and repugnant that he went on that programme when the public inquiry was still... If the public inquiry had been heard and he'd been deemed to have done a fantastic job and was great, fine, you know, rehabilitate your career however you wish. But the idea that it was done in the interim, I think, is deeply wrong.
And also, can we just take it back to the fact that he's a sitting MP? That actually the taxpayer's paying his salary. Instead, he chose to effectively abandon government, go into the jungle on ITV. He was very successful, I think, in part because people saw this single-minded focus and quite liked it. It's that single-minded focus that I think can also tip into arrogance that's probably landed him in this mess.
No, absolutely. Interesting that Isabel Oakenshaw has said this morning, this is just in, she says, I make no apology whatsoever for acting in the overwhelming public interest. Wow.
But it is in the public interest. If this hadn't come out of the public inquiry, we would never have known.
True, but I do also think we have to think about what she believes the public interest is. So Isabel Oakeshott is somebody who has long campaigned against lockdown, something we know that saved lives. Isabel Oakeshott is also a journalist who takes quite a lot of her sourcing from, I would say, fringe scientists in the medical sphere.
That's been very kind.
Thank you. I'm just trying to be polite. It's quite early in the morning. You could listen to my show for a different version of all of this.
We certainly will.
And so she listens to French scientists. She's also been, I would say, somebody who strays away from objective journalism, very much into campaigning against lockdown, which, as you said earlier, was in direct opposition to what Matt Hancock was arguing for, which was lockdown to protect us.
Can we really, really quickly just talk about another story in the front pages this morning, which, of course, is Harry and Meghan's eviction from Frogmore Cottage. Yes, well, this is quite fascinating, is it? Not unsurprising, though. Not unsurprising.
Well, what's quite interesting is apparently the decision was made by the King to evict them from Frogmore Cottage only hours after the spare book came out. So it was obviously done in sort of the heat of passion. I actually think it feels quite cruel.
It gives them the moral high ground as well, which is probably not what they want to do.
I just sort of think it's a 4 or 5 bedroom house, which, you know, we'd all love to live in and it's lovely, it's all been beautifully decorated and all the rest of it. But it is their only home, it's their only permanent residence here. Where do we want them to stay when they come over, where they can have security?
You know what? They can get a hotel room.
But they wouldn't necessarily have the security at that point. But also, on a very human level, if the King wants to have any relationship with his child moving forward, this is not the way to achieve it. And I just think, as a parent, would you do that?
Do you not think as a parent, you would say, OK, first of all, I think it's great that Harry and Meghan have gone off to Montecito and have their own lives. Absolutely good on them. They're both people who have their own talents and will be very successful in life. Equally, we're in the middle of a cost of living crisis. There are people who can barely afford their rent, barely afford to buy a house, particularly in the southeast of London. I have very limited sympathy for extremely wealthy people who have a place that they're not using in palace grounds. And actually, I would suggest that going forward, I do very much sincerely hope that they can mend their relationships with their families. And I think there's wrong on both sides.
But this is not going to lead to a way of healing that relationship. And also, the royal family, they've got houses all over the place.
Exactly.
And also, who do they want to put into this house? Oh, Prince Andrew.
That's odd. That's just odd.
That's deeply
well,
wrong.
that hasn't been confirmed, and I suspect that's a bit of sort of playfulness on the part of the newspapers, if I'm honest.
I don't know.
I say to a newspaper editor.
I don't know. I think it looks like that's the way it's heading. And so the idea you're going to send out this sort of young family and replace it with Prince Andrew, who's currently living in like a 32-room house.
Well, they could go stay. They've plenty of rooms, as you said. They can go and stay. There's security there. They can do it. But you're right. I don't see any way back. Listen, thank you so much. We had so much to talk about, and we have so much more. And thank you both. See you really soon.